All right, in this lesson, we are going to look at percentage. We'll look at writing percentage as a fraction, a decimal, and a percent, and then we're going to solve some basic percentage problems. All right, so what does percent mean? I find if you explain what percent means, often it means those brain fart moments that happen on a test. Um, it, they're not as prevalent because you remember what the word means. So I don't usually give you word lessons in math, but this is one of them. So the word per is really another way of saying divide, okay? And then cent, if you think about cents in a dollar, centennial, centimeters, cent always means 100. It comes from a Latin word. I did a course in Latin terminology and we learned all those little details. Most boring course in the world, but sometimes it's good to know what words make up larger words. So percent simply means out of 100. So if we see 20%, when we write this percent symbol, we are saying that it's 20 over 100, okay? Our 100 is our whole, so that would be our entire circle. So the whole quantity, if we have 20% of one thing, that means 80% of the original amount must be something else, okay? So in a case where there's maybe 20% off, 20% off of a price means we're going to pay 80% of the price. We'll look at some examples of that in a little bit, but keep in mind that a percentage is really just a ratio question. Now, it's good to know a few different ways to write percentage questions, and depending on which way you do the math, I'm going to give you two strategies. You will find either decimals or fraction form will be easier for you. So percent 60% is the same as, so in order to turn it into a decimal, we know that percent sign means out of 100, so 60 out of 100 leaves us with, in our calculator, 0.6. Or when you divide by 100, you just move your decimal 2 places, okay? So it's going to move, and it always is going to move 2 places towards the left. Now to write it as a fraction, we already wrote it as a fraction. We said 60 over 100, but you know from your fraction section, we wouldn't leave it that way. We'd want to reduce it, so we can divide by 10 top and bottom, so that's going to get rid of those zeros for us. So 6 over 10, or 3 over 5 is another way we could write that question. Now let's look at the decimal 0.25. This should be one that's really common that you know off by heart already. 0.25, let's write it as a percent first. So in order to write it as a percent, we need to multiply by 100. So we're going to move our decimal 2 places in the other direction. So this is going to be 25. Important to have that percent sign in there to make it equivalent. So 25%, 25 out of 100. Here we have 25 hundredths. So that's another way of saying it. 25 out of 100 leaves us with a quarter. So one thing you can do is you can just take the decimal portion. If there was a 1 here, we would include that as well. But take our decimal portion and put it under 100. If it was 0.255, we might put it over 1,000. Let's see if there, I don't know that I need to have an example of that. These basic ones will do for you. If we have 75 over 60, let's write that as a decimal. So 75 divided by 60 gives us 1.25. So 1.25, we want to write that as a percent. So this is 1 and 25 hundredths. So as a percent, we're going to have 100% and an extra 25% from the fraction. So this is going to be 125%. And if we wanted to over here, 75 over 60, we could reduce this one. We don't have to, but this would reduce to 1 1/4. Okay, so just a couple different ways to rearrange two questions. Most of the time we just deal with moving our decimal. So percent going from this form to our decimal form is the most common. We really won't use the fraction form very much other than to say 60 over 100, something like that. But the syllabus says we have to cover all three, so we've covered all three briefly. Big one to remember, is if you're going from percent to a decimal, we're going to divide by 100. And then if we're going from a decimal to a percent, we're going to multiply by 100. So those are the two key pieces. Now there's three types of percentage problems. We can have a question where we're looking for the amount. Sometimes I'll use the word part. Okay, an amount that's equal to the percent or the part out of a whole. We could have questions where we're looking for what is the percent, or we can have questions where we're looking for the whole. There are only three types of percentage questions. So if you're a memorizer, you may find it easier to memorize the three different types of questions, but I'm going to give you a strategy for even if you aren't good at memorizing, how you can figure that out. I'm not a memorizer, so I like to have a simple formula, and I can do algebra. So by doing a little bit of algebra or understanding how a ratio works, I don't have to memorize three different formulas. All right, so we're going to start. So part over whole is what percentage is always going to be equal to. Now this part could be more than 100% in some cases. We won't have any of those in this lesson. We'll save that till the next lesson. So let's start with this question. What percent is 75 out of 357? So in this question, we're looking for what is the percent. Now, percent is equal to a part over a whole, and it's written as, I want to write it as a ratio, what out of 100 equals 75 out of 357. So that's really the ratio that we need to figure out. So what out of 100 is 75 divided by 357? Well, if we do just 75 divided by 357, we get 0.21. What is that out of 100? You have 2100, so this is going to be equal to 21%. So this is just setting up, this is the ratio form of a percent question. You might just and oftentimes I won't write these types of questions out as a ratio just because I've got the process memorized so well. If I was to write this question out just simply for the sake of, if I asked you to show work, how much do you actually need to show? If I was writing this question out, I would write it the same way you would see me grade your test. 75 over 357 equals 0.21 equals 21%. And that's perfectly acceptable. We'll call this the short method. Okay. This is the ratio form is the Y method. That's why this happens to work. So a quick question that you could see show up. So some questions will be really straightforward where you're asked for your percentage. Sometimes you'll be given questions that are a little more contextual. So if 16 out of 159 inspected parts, apparently I can't write, are defective, what percent of parts are defective? Okay, so we're looking for percent. So I know I'm going to have to divide my two quantities. So something out of 100 is equal to, well, the defective ones are the percent that I'm looking for. So I'm going to match that up. That's 16 out of 15. And then 159 is the whole amount of parts that were inspected. If we divide this, we are going to get X is equal to 10%, or we could say 16 out of 159 is equal to 0.10, which is equal to 10%. Okay, so two methods in order to figure out. So when we follow this method with a ratio, you'll see it's already X over 100. that x over 100 means I'm going to get a percentage that I don't have to multiply by 100. When I just write it like this, we'll get our decimal form of percentage that we then have to multiply by 100 in order to turn to 10%. I never know which way is the best way to explain it. And for some students, they'll get one method easier, and for other students, they'll get the other method easier. So it's up to you which one you happen to choose. Is 15% of 60? So this is like a tax question. 15% also happens to be a tax rate that we use. So in this case, I like to think about what information do we have? So we have a percent. This number, is it the part or is it the whole? That's the next thing we need to ask ourselves. So we want 15% of 60, so this must be the whole. What is 15%? The what is the part. Okay, so that's what we're looking for. So I'm going to write this out in ratio form first. So we'll do the ratio method first. So 15 out of 100 is equal to something. What is 15%? So that's what we're looking for out of 60. Okay, so 15 times 60 divided by 100, we will find x equals 9. The shortcut method. Well, if we were to do the shortcut method, 15 over 100 is just 0.15. And we have a 60 on the bottom here. So in order to undo this division, it would be multiply. So these questions whenever we're looking for the part is always going to end up being part equals our percent as a decimal times the whole, or times the base. That's the other word that we sometimes use. So in this case, we get 0.15 times 60. It's exactly the same math as you're doing up here. It's just a matter of where you're dividing by that 100. So here we can do this part in our head, which still leaves us with 9. Okay. So we have two different methods in order to do these questions. A tool is 30% off if the tool was originally $199.99. How many dollars of savings is that? So, well, it's 30% off. 30 out of 100 is equal to x out of 199.99. X, if we solve, is equal to $60. Okay, if you round that off. The other way you could have solved that was you could have said, well, we have $199.99. We multiply by our percent as a decimal. So 0.30, and that will give you 60 as well. Okay, so you have two different methods in order to get to exactly the same solution. Both of them should work. This is the one that people tend to get stuck with more. And if I'm going to see a mistake on a test, it's always this question. So we don't spend a lot of time on percent questions because people usually know percentage quite well, but these questions stump people. 18 is 15% of what number? So this is my part that's equal to the percent. I know my percent, it's there. And the what number is the whole that I'm looking for, okay? These questions I always set up in the ratio method. It works for my head, and I don't know why I always do that, but I do. So when I set this question up, I'll go 15 over 100 is equal to 18 over x out of something. Simply do cross multiplication to solve for a ratio. So 15x equals 1800 divided by 15. X is equal to 120. Okay. Does that make sense? Well, 15 out of 100 equals 18 out of what? Well, the number on the bottom over here should be larger because the number on the top here is larger. So that's how I always set that question up. For some reason, that keeps me from making mistakes. It just seems to be able to reason through my head easier. So I'm guessing if that works for me, it might work for some of you. The other thing I've had classes go is they've said, well, in these questions, we always end up dividing by our percent. And that might be a little easier to see if I should write it out another way. So 0.15, I'm going to write the percent as a decimal, is equal to 18 over x. Well, if we, oops, it's supposed to be an x. Let me see if I can erase here. So if I was to cross multiply, I would get 0.15x equals 18. Divide both sides by 1/5. X is equal to 18 divided by 1500ths. Say that the proper way just to get you back at that. So you'll notice we have 18 and we're dividing by our percent as a decimal. Anytime we're looking for a whole, that will work for us. Okay, so that gives us 120 as well. So if you're looking for the whole, you're going to divide the part by percent as a decimal. Okay, so that kind of gives you a little shortcut method. Hopefully that works for you to help you identify those ones. So that's the other kind of question. The very last question we have is just a contextual question. A toolbox is on sale for $286. This is 85% of the regular price. How much was the regular price? So we have $286 is the sale price. That's equal to 85%. Okay, so I need to figure out what was the original whole amount. When I set it up this way, it's easy cross multiplication. So we get, it's equal to 336.47. Okay, that's using our ratio method. So you're going to multiply by 100 and divide by 85. If we set it up the other way, we could say, well, I take my part and I divide by the percent as a decimal. 286 divided by 0.85 leaves us with 336.47. Both ways give us exactly the same solution. You can choose whichever method you want. This one, most mistakes made here. Okay, most mistakes get made in that type of question. So that gives you just kind of a brief overview of the types of questions you can see. So next it'd be good to do a few questions for the practice worksheet and then do the quiz on SAM. That just gets you to do a few extra practice questions with these.